Dr. Califf, thank you very much for joining in and speaking to CNBC-TV18. It's your first trip to India as an FDA official, and separately, you're here to celebrate 15 years of the FDA in India. You've met a multiple number of people in India while you're here, a multiple number of stakeholders. What's your experience been?
It's been tremendous. I've been to India a number of times before, but not in an official capacity. Saw a lot of people that I've known in the past. That was fantastic, but also met a number of new people. A lot is happening in India right now, and it's very exciting to work together with people in India on our common issues.
Well, one of the big things is that India is the pharmacy to the world. We have the largest number of US FDA compliant facilities outside of the US, but still we do face a lot of compliance issues. What do you think is the biggest challenge that India faces?
Well, we have a market which is growing all over the world, and including your own market here in India, and so your industry is serving a lot of people with a lot of expectations. If we just look at the generic drug world in the United States, it's over 90% of our prescriptions now are generics, and India is supplying a very large proportion of those drugs, so expectations are high. Constructing a manufacturing system that delivers the goods reliably, predictably, month after month is a big challenge for anyone. And I think as parts of the Indian economy are gaining steam and picking up, more and more people are getting into the business. That creates challenges in creating those systems that we can all depend on.
But what do you think would probably be the biggest challenge that we face when it comes to compliance? The reason I ask is that post-COVID-19, we've seen a surge in terms of Form 483s, OAIs, or official action indicated statuses, even import alerts. Is that only because there was a lot of pent-up inspections that needed to take place, or is there a slip in terms of compliance post-COVID-19?
Well, that's a great question, and we don't really have a clear answer to that because there are several variables changing at the same time. What we do know is that we're seeing in particular firms issues both in manufacturing and in the clinical data that we need. Because when you make a pill, it's not just do you make the pill with the same chemicals in it, is that pill bioactive? Does it release the ingredients into our bloodstream so it has the effect? I can think about this in terms of myself. I have high blood pressure and high cholesterol, like most men my age. I'm almost 72 now, and I'm very dependent on 4 generic drugs that probably do come from India. And it's not just does the pill have the chemical in it, it's that when I take the pill, does it actually control my blood pressure? So the measurements done in people, in human studies, are also very important. We're seeing issues across the board. They're not unique to India. All countries have the same problems. This is hard work, and it's very difficult to get it right. But we have seen a flurry of issues in India that have demanded our attention.
And what are those kind of issues which have demanded your attention, which are probably surfacing in India in the past 2 to 3 years?
So much of reliable manufacturing and clinical studies is really designing the process correctly and then demonstrating to yourself and to others that you're doing what you said you were going to do reliably. So if you say we're going to produce a drug that has chemicals within a certain standard, then you have to show that when you actually manufacture the drug, you are falling within that standard. And it has to be done reproducibly. If you find that you're not within that standard, as painful as it may be, you have to go back and not put that drug on the market and go back and fix the problem. And so we're seeing some lapses in areas such as that. And in the clinical studies, these are difficult studies to do, and you have to measure things very carefully and just at the right time, and we're seeing some issues there also.
So one of the key issues that the U.S. is facing is of drug shortages, which is at a multi-year high. How much of it is because of non-compliant facilities?
Well, let's go back to the beginning here. First, I have to say this is an amazing opportunity, right? Because as our population ages in the U.S. and with 7.6 billion other people in the world, the demand for these drugs is only going to grow tremendously. So India, as a leading manufacturer, has a very bright future here. And we are seeing exemplary firms that are doing a tremendous and reliable job. But what happens is these drugs are also being sold at a very low margin. Remember, the concept behind generic drugs is you're making a copy of what was already made and sold as an innovator drug under patent protection. When the patent runs out, now you're in the generic phase. And the whole issue there is, can you reproducibly make the same drug, and then the competition is on price. And when the economics are not right, the firms may find that it's very difficult to invest in the technology and the people that they need. There's also competition for the best people. The ones who really know how to do it are valuable, just like any other aspect of life. So all of this together creates a situation where if we do an inspection and find a problem, and the company needs to stop making the drug while it fixes its issues, then a shortage occurs in the U.S. because the supply chain has not been built to be as resilient as it should be. A lot of attention on this now in the U.S. I didn't expect to spend so much of my time on this when I came back to be commissioner for the second time. But it's a really critical issue for the U.S. right now.
So how exactly does India fit into that puzzle then? Because there is an expectation that there is a strengthening of supply chains when it comes to APIs, formulations, which needs to be undertaken, especially post-COVID-19, in order to ensure critical supply of drugs is continuous, and something like COVID-19 doesn't impact it in the future. What is the U.S. doing? Where does India play a part?
Well, first of all, the relationship with India is long-standing, but it's recently been stronger than ever. These are powerful economies with strengths that match very well and a lot of good relationships among people. And so we don't want to be totally dependent on India or any other country, but we see India as a critical part of the supply chain for the U.S. and for the world. So you'll hear in the U.S. about onshoring, bringing a lot of the manufacturing activity back to the U.S. None of us think that it should be completely brought back to the U.S. There should be an equilibrium. So, I mean, a key concept in supply chain resilience is, what if there's a tornado in the U.S. or a monsoon in India that wipes out a plant for a period of time? We need to be able to depend on relying on each other to pick up that deficit and make up for it without an interruption of supply. I mean, after all, these drugs are life-saving for many people. And as I say, I'm dependent, too, on good medication.
You know, it's interesting, Dr. Califf, that you've brought up that point about moving manufacturing back to the U.S., because there was a U.S. government report recently as well, which indicated that there's too much reliance of manufacturing of drugs on India and China, and that there has to be some sort of indigenous manufacturing to take place. How is the US FDA tackling that specific issue of over-reliance on India and China? India probably more.
Well, one of the difficulties for us at the FDA is we don't control the economic issues, so it's much broader than the FDA. We only have a certain role to play. Our main job is to make sure that when a drug does come into the U.S. from outside, that it's safe and effective. The supply part of it, we do a lot to fix supply problems when they occur. But the question of what's the right balance is a very important one. This is being debated not so much within the U.S., but within other parts of the U.S. government. And I would just say in general, we all became overly reliant on China. I mean, China has been a growing country. They focus very much on the basic starting materials and the API, as you said. We need to see that distributed more around the world. India, I think in all of our planning, will be a dominant component of that. So it's not that we want to take it from India. What I see is the overall pie is getting bigger. India will maintain a very big part of that pie. But every country, including the U.S., should ensure that if something happens, that they have the capability for national security reasons of producing their own drugs. We've talked a lot about devices too while I've been here, another important part of your biomedical economy. You have a lot of very inventive people here, and a very similar story there. We would see the device and digital communities in India obviously very strong and growing. We just need to make sure U.S. doesn't depend completely on other countries, so if something happens, we have none of our own capability.
So will India be a dominant supplier to the U.S., say, 5 years from now? Can we still expect that?
I certainly expect that to be the case. I have no doubt about it. And, you know, we're celebrating the 15th year of our India office at the FDA. We have really talented and dedicated team here working with your industry. And I just loved a comment in a visit we made yesterday to one of the firms. I asked the question, how often should we inspect? Because we're going to inspect more. And it's not to punish the industry, it's more to develop a system where there are no surprises on any side. And the answer was, come anytime you want. That's the answer that we'd really like to see.
And will those inspections be unannounced? Will it be more independent translators? Because the US FDA seems to be facing that issue when it comes to India as well as China. Announced inspections 12 or 9 weeks in advance, so they have time to prepare, and things such as translators who are not independent. So are those factors going to be considered now?
I feel like a real expert here because in my former life, I've been inspected by the FDA multiple times and on the boards of companies that have undergone inspections. And I think a mixture of announced and unannounced is important, and you'll see more unannounced inspections. Because as the gentleman said yesterday in one of the Indian firms, if you're always observing good practice, it shouldn't matter when an inspector comes. It's just your normal routine being observed. And we've seen in India that there's every capability of doing this at an extraordinarily high level. Also mentioned that digital technology could be very important here because a lot of what you need to know to assure that there's high quality now is being monitored within the firms with digital technology. In the future, we should be able to plug right into that digital information and keep track of the quality as we go. Then the inspections are very focused on issues where we may have concerns or want to learn about something.